welcome to this evening's episode of Conversations with UX Copenhagen. I am Helle Martens. I'm the curator, founder, owner, whatever of the UX Copenhagen conference that I run. I have run on my own. The past 2 years, I've had a lot of help from Lone Uro, who's also here. Hi, Lone. She's muted, so she can't say hello. Yeah, and so maybe I should just quickly say that UX Copenhagen is an annual conference. It's international. It's about 200 people, and it's usually in Copenhagen. Now, for the third time, it's going to be online. Maybe with a hybrid solution, we're hoping that we can allow some people to come inside the studio, but otherwise it's just going to be kind of like a studio. And I started UX Copenhagen like 8 years ago, I think, after I had an accident where I slipped on some ice and smacked my head and was basically, put out of function for, well, I thought I was okay to go back to work right away, but turned out I wasn't. So I was like sick for about 6 months. And a piece of advice to anybody who hits their head, give it time. Don't go back to work. There's no way you can go back to work immediately. So I had like a concussion and whiplash and slip discs and shoulder, clavicle that had all sorts of nice things, but I'm pretty much okay now and it's great. Anyway, so I tried to go back to work. I couldn't do it and ended up being laid off. And so I was like, all right, I have to step away from the computer. I cannot, be sitting in front of a computer for 60 hours a week. And so I decided to start my own company, and I was like, oh, I can just host workshops and I can do whatever. And that didn't, really work out as well as I thought. It's really hard to get freelance gigs, I think. And I see Jane nodding her head. So I don't know. And then I was like joking about, I was supposed to go to the Nielsen Norman group in London for the usability week. And there was like no way I could afford that without a job. So I started joking that, oh, I'll, host my own conference. I'll do my own Nielsen Norman group, whatever thing here. And I met a couple of people and we actually made it happen. We sold like 140 tickets to the first event. So that was pretty crazy. And then I've held, 7 more. So it's become an annual thing and I love it. And my favorite thing about hosting the conference is actually meeting all these people. Today we have like 115 signups. That's crazy. Welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see you guys here. Yeah, so the fun part is meeting the people, meeting speakers, and one of my favorite things is getting to know them, which is like, the initial talk and where, I'm interviewing them to see if, their talk proposal that they've sent me is actually something that would be suitable for the conference. And these talks usually go in all sorts of directions and I love it. And I wanted to share that with everybody else. And that's why we're doing the Conversations with UX Copenhagen tonight. And today I have Jane Ruffino. I was going to say from Stockholm, but you're not in Stockholm right now. You're in the States. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I'm normally based in Stockholm. Right now I am in Washington, D.C. in not very sunny right now, Friendship Heights. I am a content designer, UX writer, but I'm also a PhD student in contemporary archaeology, and I study the physical architectures of the internet. So to me, it's always been really important to, I'm just interested in like how stuff fits together. So I think content design and archaeology are actually really good partners because it's all about using material culture to understand people. So trying to explain and understand people. You can also maybe hear the sounds of a 21-month-old whining in the background. She somehow has not started responding to like, hey, let's play the game where you go 5 minutes without whining. She always makes that one. But she's with my mom. She's fun. So yeah, and that's me. So I work as a freelancer and consultant. So yeah, I'm nodding my head like it's really hard to set up in that way. And then the other part of, so I'm like sort of half and half. And technically I'm 75-25, but it's really half and half. Don't tell anyone.
And you're teaching as well, right?
Yes, so I teach a 12-week course through the Barry School of Communication in Stockholm. It's an international course though, so it's all online in UX writing. So last week for signups, if you want to sign up for the 12 weeks of, it's pretty intensive. It's, you know, it's not a boot camp, it's a professional development course, and it's really fun. It's a small group. There's lots of small group work and interaction, and it's very like coachy. It's not just the material. I really love it. I really love doing it. I'm also teaching, I'm also doing a workshop next week for Rosenfeld Media called Content Design for Everyone Else. And then I've been working on a self-paced course, which is going to get launched, I think, in the spring. And yeah, so, and then also occasionally I get to teach my actual field of study, which is archaeology. And I really like doing that. So I like talking about how they fit together too. I think that's really fun.
That's amazing. You know, I had a chat with Dave Dylan Thomas, as you mentioned before. I had a chat with him last week, and you know, the way he kind of, you know, zooms out and has like the whole picture of things. I'm so jealous of people that could do that. I don't really have that. I'm like really into details. I mean, I do run the conference all on my own, so I guess I do have it somehow, but it's not like as obvious. He was saying, he was like comparing a talk to like a comical, you know, stand-up gig, where he's like, oh, they structured it this way and they did this and they put in this bit. And I'm like, you know, I would never see that.
But you do, because like your theme is pretty obvious.
Okay.
You do actually, but you build the big picture through the details.
I
So
guess so, yeah. But okay,
you're
so it
allowed
would
to
be
say you have
opposite. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah.
Just quickly, the self-paced course is not going to be on Barry's. I probably will be there in the fall, and I'm excited that Sarah, you are signed up to the workshop next week. And we won't be covering form design for next week, so this is totally different.
Yeah, which launches us directly into your workshop. So tell me about, well, actually, we just agreed yesterday that you're going to do a talk and a workshop.
Yes, I'm very excited.
Me too.
Forms are like, so I have a friend and actually former student who's a UX designer, and has my favorite description of the internet belongs to him. So the web is just 3 forms in a trench coat. And, you know, like, and there is this kind of, you know, it's very true that forms are what make the web interactive, that is how we interact with everything digital, and forms are obviously like offline as well. And one of the reasons they're so bad, like so many forms are so bad and stressful, is they don't have an owner. Nobody owns them. Like everyone wants to be like in charge of the decisions, but no one actually wants to be responsible for the decisions. So, and as a content designer, it's very often where you get into a turf wars with the developers rather than designers. Like, unfortunately, turf wars are just like a fact of working in design. But yeah, and we're kind of like trying to figure out how the system works and trying to get them to redesign the system so that you can make a better form. And so I'm going to talk about how we can make better forms, but what we actually need as a prerequisite to that ownership is we need more power. I mean, a form can only be good if, or anything that you make can only be good if the person making it has the power to make it good, and good in a real way. So we can't just go like, okay, now you have the responsibility, but we're not going to give you any power, because number one, that's like the express lane to burnout. And, you know, so how do we actually deal with the prerequisites before we can design a good form? And then the workshop is really really a hands-on way to take a problem-solving perspective to form design. And, you know, when we talk about design, we talk about solving problems for users, but a form is actually a problem we're handing them because the form is in the way of whatever it is they want to do, right? Like no one's like, I just filled out this awesome form. Like at best, they won't remember it. Like I think it's kind of why we like, I love like answering like BuzzFeed quizzes, because it's just no stakes. There's no stakes in it. I don't care. Like, but I don't actually want to answer anything that's going to have like, I don't know if I don't know how many other countries raise their children with this concept of like, when you're in school, oh, hi, terrified in childhood of like this thing called the permanent record. Like, is this going to go on my permanent record? I was terrified of that as a child. And like forms kind of evoke this feeling of like, where is this going to go? Who's going to know this about me? Where is this going to come back and haunt me? Like, and in many ways, this kind of surveillance culture that we've created means that's true. Like what you type in can come back to haunt you. But a form is also a trade-off. So like, I would rather fill out 100 forms than have a system know everything about me before I've gone near it. So, but how do we make that, how do we like be transparent?
Yeah.
How do we have the right amount of friction? Because frictionless equals surveillance always. Like frictionless experience is a surveillance, is like, there's no way around it. So it's like, how do we make sure that, sorry?
What do you mean with that?
So like when you have a frictionless experience, you are like, I am not a great example. Like I would love to say like, I never use third-party, like I never use like third-party logins. Like if I can log in with Facebook, I'm gonna log in with Facebook. Well, now I've just like connected my pieces together because I don't want like friction either. So the less friction there is, the more opportunity there is for people to not make a decision, and you're taking decisions away from people. And very often you're replacing that with like, well, we have the data about them already, or we can pull the data from here. So, you know, like APIs are great, but where are you, you know, it's like, what's in that? And one of the pieces that I think brings in my PhD research is this concept of like, what is the internet? And in 2006, with Senator Ted Stevens, he was a Republican from Alaska. I mean, he was a real piece of trash, right? Like, but, and this was a debate about net neutrality, and he was voting against it. He didn't, you know, of course. And somebody had obviously explained the internet to him, and he was half listening, but he kind of got it. And he gets up in the Senate and he's like, the internet is not a big truck. It's a series of tubes. And everybody thought that was hilarious. And they like, internet as it was, you know, back in 2006 just exploded. But he was actually right. The internet is not only a series of tubes, they're polyethylene tubes, like it literally is. But so maybe this is actually like a helpful framing, like what's in that tube? What is that tube feeding? So to actually like have this, and knowing that it's an analogy, right? It's not like, okay, this is our one analogy that we're going to stick with and really be invested in. It's a temporary, never hold analogies too strongly, but like, so yeah, when you take away friction, you take away decision-making. And when you take away decision-making, like what could go wrong in that? Who's making the decision? What are they interested in? Where else do they have power? So, you know, asking questions like that is really important.
Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah, I never thought of that. It is true. Of course, it's all connected. Of course, I know of, you know, the underwater connections and all that, but I never, yeah. Of course, it's all.
I mean, that's like quite undifferent. I mean, that data, the way that travels, it's not like that's more complex, but it's like when we think about like an API. But yeah, I mean, we also have to think about the internet as a physical place. And right now we're dealing with a situation where, you know, data centers are using a tremendous amount of power. So they're displacing the power in, you know, they're displacing the power in entire countries. Data centers use like, and I think it's like Bitcoin now. I mean, that's not data center, but it's like Bitcoin mining uses like the power supply, the equivalent power supply of the country the size of Argentina.
Yeah.
So when we think about collecting data, storing data, processing data, we are participating in this culture. And like, this is not something we can solve individually as designers, but if as an industry, we have a collect as little as possible mentality, because and again, with, sorry, another archaeological reference, when you're excavating, you never excavate in a way that you don't rip everything out. You never do, unless you have to, unless it's a rescue operation and you can't help it. But the rule of thumb is like, never take anything out of the ground that you do not have a plan for, because the basements and storage facilities of museums are overflowing with stuff no one ever wants to see. 500 versions of this thing. No one needs, like, you have to think.
Sorry, that was me.
Okay. So yeah, you have to think about like, what is the plan for all of the stuff that you're collecting? So that's applicable to forms where people are giving you information, and like, what's the purpose of the form too? It's like, you know, if it's a sign up form versus a form for generating a quote for something. But yeah.
Or collecting like useless information. We were just briefly talking about it before we went online, Jane and I, but you know, like collecting like gender, what for?
Yeah.
What is you do? I mean, of course it's to target ads,
Yeah.
but you know, you really have to talk about this with your team. I mean, what are we collecting all this stuff for? Are we going to use it? Is it important for us?
Yeah, and I think that's really, you know, there's a lot of talk, especially like in content design, about like, how do you design a gender selector that's inclusive? And it's like, okay, great. Yes. But if you are collecting gender for a legitimate reason, then it should be pretty straightforward to design that content. Because if you're, you know, saying, okay, this is like I was telling Helle before we spoke, like I was designing a sign up process. This was like 7 or 8 years ago, for a banking app. It was a third-party banking app. And we had to validate the users' identities through their bank. And their identity validation system required binary gender. And users were like, really? And I was like, yeah, really? Do we have to do this? I couldn't change anything on the screen. So all I could do was use the FAQ. Sorry, I know we're not supposed to, but there was the best I could do to say, like, we are not collecting this. Someone else is collecting this. And also, like, if you need, they need help to know, like, what do I say here? And it was, you need to enter the gender that your bank has about you. That's all. Like that. So it's like, you need to make sure that you tell them why. And I also added, like, we would prefer not to collect it at all. And then I got in a lot of trouble with our biggest investor, who was like, people are going to think we're a gay bank. And I was like, whoa, that would be terrible.
Like, hey, you might get a bunch of new customers.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, this is like a sidetrack, but I also had like I was on the marketing side, but I was doing the product content. And it was a tiny team. I was the US team. Yeah. And for a while. And I hired some people, so that was good. But I was like looking for a place to spend sponsorship money. I was like, I'm bad at marketing, by the way, so this was maybe not, but I was like, what can I sponsor where will actually like be visible, because I don't have a big budget. So we sponsored the New York Pride Run, and we sponsored the Pride Run the same week that the Supreme Court ruling for marriage equality came. It was like literally the same week. So like we were all like, our logos and everything were on like New York One. And it was like, I was like, isn't that cool? We got tons of exposure for very little money. We were the only brand at the race. No, he was really worried we would be seen as a gay bank. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Why do you live in New York, dude?
Yeah.
You really picked the wrong city.
Oh, that's hilarious. Speaking of sustainability, actually, which you touched upon before, there's also going to be a talk about sustainable UX. We had the lovely Torsten Jonas last year, who did a talk about burnout in UX, actually. And then we had this evening like co-design session. I think it was like 2.5, 3 hours, where everybody just got together on different Miro boards and was designing about sustainable UX, where we talk about the UN goals, and all 17 goals, and then like put people out into all 17, like in 17 different groups. So he's going to come back this year and talk about sustainable UX. And he's actually working on, or like the whole group of people is working on like this playbook. So we don't want to call it a manifesto anymore, but kind of a playbook, like how can I make my website, use less energy, or, if we remove the slider, it'll use less energy, or if we have fewer pictures, or, if we have smaller pictures, all that. So that's really interesting too. That's also a way of looking at it, because forms can take up a lot of energy also.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was like, so I'm in DC, and I'm like every parent in America having a childcare crisis. Oh, yeah. So I've been like trying to sign up for places where I can find a babysitter. And so I'm getting recommendations. And one of the like big groups in this area is an old school listserv. And I signed up for it. And one of the first messages that I saw on it was a dude with an AOL address looking to borrow a VHS. And I was like, man, I miss the 90s. Oh. And but actually, like, when I think, and then I was like, so there was another one that was like an old school bulletin board system. And actually, like, there was a bulletin board that I joined when I moved to Ireland in the late 90s. I met so many of my lifelong friends on that bulletin board. And I'm like, that was great. Like, They were great. The web of the 90s was not this like broken, disconnected experience. Sure, there were things about it that needed to be, but how much did we really need to do this? Like people, like, I'm not saying like it was good as it was, but like, you know, when we fail to appreciate what this much more like low tech, you know, now when you sign up, you like open a window and you get like, especially if you're trying to like, I mean, of course, everyone probably here has done a lot more online shopping in the last 2 years than ever before. And it's like, sign up for our newsletter, get 15% off, log in, create an account. Oh, you just cookies, cookies, cookies. Now you have to read this whole thing. And it's like, just like, have you seen this? You left something in your cart. Don't forget, don't go away. And it's like, if you walked into a store and someone behaved like that to you, you'd be like, I can't, I'm sorry, I'm going to go now.
It's like, so funny. Luna and I were talking about this morning. We met up and we were talking about, well, we were talking about COVID, of course. What else is the conversation going to be about today? And then we were looking into our blood type. This is a long story, but anyway, to shorten it, we went into, I have this app on my phone that's like an emergency app, right? So it has my husband's telephone number, and I was thinking it would have my blood type in it, right? So I opened the app, and and it's an emergency app, right? It's called 112, which is the number you dial in Denmark for emergencies, for like fire or police or whatever, ambulance. And I open the app, and the first thing that happens is I get a notifications. It says allow notifications. I was like, are you crazy? If I'm in an emergency situation, don't throw this at me. And Luna's like, yeah. That's like you walk into a store and you're trying to get to the cash register and they throw like a, you know, mailbox in your face, or, you know, another something. You're like, no.
Yeah. No. And actually, like, you know, first of all, yeah, like it, and then it's like, okay, if your blood type is in this app, where else is it going to go? You know, is that secure? And like all of these things that are thrown up. So when we talk about forms, like all of those things that are thrown up are forms. Fill out this form, like pushing, you know, a modal with one button is technically it's a form. What, like, it doesn't matter, you know, before we ask, like, is it inclusive? Well, it doesn't matter if it's inclusive, if it sucks. Like, who cares? Don't build sucky things that are inclusive are still sucky things for, now they're sucky for more people. Great. You made it suck for everybody. Excellent. Like, that is not, that's not how you do inclusive design. Like, make it suck for everyone. Excellent. And actually, like, so being in the US right now is super weird because, like, first of all, crossing a border breaks every digital experience imaginable. And we have not, like, there have been restaurants we haven't been able to order in because a lot of people are doing this like online only ordering. Great, I'm glad I can use a QR code, but how come it doesn't accept an international phone number? So we can't order from your restaurant because I can't give you a phone number that you don't actually need because I'm sitting outside. I've not eaten in a restaurant for 2 years, but like, you know, or like ordering takeout, or actually we were filling up, this was the worst one. We were filling up the car at a gas station and my boyfriend's trying to pay at the pump. And the pump will not accept a credit card without a zip code that's connected to that credit card, which means that you can't use a foreign credit card. So we had to go inside, and it's like, when you're just, and the thing is, that's not the gas station's fault. That is the fault of the company that made the software, that sold to the company that designs the system for the gas station, because that is a third-party system connected to all these other systems. So like the internationalization process right now is still controlled by like a very Silicon Valley mentality, which is weird because Silicon Valley is super diverse, but it's like America is the world. Everyone has a zip code. Well, a zip code is actually like a branded term. It's not even a real term. No one else uses it. It's a postcode or a postal code. And it's like, you know, and I mean, the same thing happens anytime you go to a country that's designed its system for the people who are like long-term residents of that country, like getting set up in Sweden, for example, like, you need your personal number before you can have a bank account, but you need your bank account before you can have a personal number, and you need an address before you can do that. And it's just like, it's a minefield. So like crossing a border breaks every experience. And if your form cannot cross a border, then your form sucks. Yeah. And if you have something critical that someone needs to add to this, like when we were signing up for our boosters, when we got here, I was like trying to find a booster appointment. And I like tried to sign up through Walgreens, and like, luckily, they don't require you, like they're very careful to not request information that like an undocumented, they're designed for undocumented people too. But then it starts asking me like security questions, like, have you ever been associated with this address? And I'm like, there are addresses that I have not lived at since I was a child. And I was like, this is really weird. And also, so this is terrifying. It's also like really upsetting and ableist, because if you have any kind of cognitive impairment, or like, and like, or if you've lived at 100 addresses because you're somebody who has been like, you know, financially struggling for your whole childhood and adulthood, and you've lived in 150 different places, you're not gonna, I don't remember every address I've ever lived at. So it's like all of these processes. Now that's not just forms, but it's like I'm filling out a form and now this is coming to me. So what is a form actually delivering to somebody, and how is that going to affect them, and how is that going to affect their ability to get to the thing on the other side of the form, which
Right.
is the reason they're filling out the form in the first place.
Right. Oh my goodness. Okay, I want to go back to something you said. You said we have all the responsibility but no power. And that is like the, I say this every time I speak to somebody, but that's obviously why I've invited you to speak, is that like, that is the whole core of the theme for the conference this year, is that, you know, we hear so many designers saying, oh, we're not, you know, we're not getting a seat at the decision-making table. And I think that what you said is one of the reasons why, you know, I mean, we've been, you know, shoveling in all this responsibility. And now that we have it, you know, what are we going to use it for, and how can we use it?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny, like I'm not trying to like advertise my course, but one of the things when I was putting together this 12-week course was like, how do I deal with ethics, right? I didn't want to do like, now we talk about the ethics, because like it should be everywhere. It should be through everything. But I do have one session on power, because I think power is a more useful frame to look at than ethics, because you can only, first of all, ethics is not one thing. It's also been like really, really co-opted by like a bunch of white dudes with a weird prodigal tech bro agenda. Like, I worked at Facebook and I destroyed democracy, and now I'm going to start an ethics think tank.
Right.
And I'm not interested remotely in those people. And I think power is more interesting. Like, how, I mean, those are people who like made a whole bunch of money. They can afford to speak truth to power.
Yes.
What happens if you don't have a whole bunch of money? Like, I have to sometimes, I try not to bite the hand that feeds me, but I nibble on it sometimes. But those people don't have, they feed themselves. Like, they've made their money. So who has the power? Who's making the money? And actually, David has a great piece of advice that he gives in his book and his talks, and gave to my students because he spoke to my students. And it was like, find out how people in senior positions are compensated. That is so, because that's how you're going to get buy-in for the thing you want to do. Yeah, it's like, how are they compensated? Because if their metrics are solely retention or something, that's not going to happen. But it's like, you know, how are they compensated? How do they get their bonuses? Because that's going to affect whether they let you do the thing you want to do.
Haha.
So someone just asked, is a 12-week course relevant? Yes, it is. Yeah, I can stick the link in later.
I can also, I'll send it out. I always,
Great, okay.
after these talks, I'll always send out a link to different, if we've talked about books or courses or whatever. Yeah. Yeah,
and everyone should read David's book. And everyone should also read Eva Penzimuth's.
Yes.
And I met her.
Yes.
Copenhagen. That's where we became friends. UX Copenhagen's great. I was telling Helle, like, UX Copenhagen is definitely like, when you're a kid, if you're like, I had a terrible experience at summer camp, but I know people who had a good experience, and they have like camp friends that they keep forever. And a good conference, the mark of a good conference is that you make conference friends that you keep.
Conference buddies, isn't that the best?
Yeah, and like, but Eva Penzimuth's Design for Safety, because I think that she brings up so many things that are so important. Like, there's another experience I had recently, which is that I don't know how it is in Denmark, but in Sweden, we have these like digital health journals. It's like a centralized journal system, because they decided that when they sold off the health system, that they could replace long-term relationships with doctors with a digital journal. So that it changed the relationship from somebody who knows you to somebody who knows about you, which is really sketchy. But so if you have any, and lots of people have, lots and lots of people, especially people with complex health needs, will lock parts of their journal because like your care is only as good as the last thing someone wrote about you. So I have part of my journal locked, and my therapist could not set up a digital appointment for me. We couldn't figure it out. And it turns out that, and it's now it's like, oh, they just wrote it. They just said it out loud. If you have any part of your journal locked for any reason, you cannot use any of the Stockholm region telehealth app services. Why?
Why?
No reason. And I'm like, some developer made that decision and decided it would work for most people. And I'm like, what about a domestic violence survivor who needs to have their therapy remote because they're in a safe house and they can't sign up somewhere else because their identity is protected? And it's just like, this is terrifying. And like, this needs to be in the press, but it's like, it never gets in the press because they're like, they think it only affects like vulnerable people, but who is a vulnerable person, which we've now really, I think, had to start to reckon with COVID, is like, who's a vulnerable person? It's not who you thought. Right. You know, who's a high risk person who's now going to be on personal lockdown while everyone else goes to the bar. You know, it's like, who is a vulnerable person? Who does this affect?
Who wants to be called vulnerable?
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to be called that. I will
victim, you know.
I know, and it's just like, so, you know, this is a system where, yeah, he couldn't, and the thing is, the system was accepting the form, but it wouldn't actually create the appointment. So there is a backup system, but it's like not as useful. It's like you can use this less good system. Yeah. And you still need your mobile bank ID to log in. So it's not like, oh, for people whose identities are protected. So it's like, and there's no reason for it. And I think it's partly like, again, this was a product that was launched. From what I can tell, they launched the proof of concept for an app that wasn't finished because the pandemic was hitting and they knew they had to compete with like private actors in the telehealth space. So they were just like, let's push it out. And probably the whole team was going, it's not finished. It's just a proof of concept. And they're like, launch it anyway. Yeah. So again, it comes down to power. So when we look at products and we look at forms and we look at like experiences, you know, are we really looking at like, is this good design or bad design? Like sometimes that's relevant. But where is the power? Yeah. Who had the power here? That's a much more helpful question.
I doubt that somebody was designing that intentionally, right?
No.
I doubt like a developer going, oh, I'm going to do this. So that.
Yeah, exactly. No, they just thought it didn't matter. Yeah. Or somebody in the chain thought it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So again, how are people compensated? I think that really fits there. Developers compensated for like finishing the project. The person in charge is compensated for delivering the project. And you know, these are the same things where like government services are generally built by agencies and they farm out different pieces to different agencies. So there's no connection between, you know, the agencies themselves, and they're often competitors. So they don't get, you know, it's just like, of course it's badly designed. You just gave, no one has any power now. So instead of like decentralizing power or devolving power and sharing power, now like it's, the power is just entropy. You just gave it over to entropy. Like now it sucks.
That's really bad. It's kind of the Wild West out there still, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think like I think the other thing is just like, good design costs a lot of money.
Yes.
It costs a lot of money, and bad design costs more money. But exactly. Who's bearing the cost is what matters. So like bad design, the cost is borne by the user. Good design, the cost is borne by the service provider or some aspect of them.
So, yeah. So how do we get, you know, the good design that costs a lot? How do we get that across?
I mean, I think it always comes down to collective power, you know, whether it's joining a union, whether it's forming, you know, I mean, I think in the Nordics, I don't know how it is in Denmark, like the unions, they're not as radical as like right now. There's such a huge unionization push in the US. and they're radical. They're not like, they're like, no, we want to take power from the bosses and give it to the workers. Seeing ourselves as workers is actually, I think, a really essential part of this. I like to ask people, I mean, it's just a provocative question, like, do you see, now probably it was more relevant before COVID, do you see the janitor as your colleague, as a coworker? And for a lot of people, it's no. And like, for a lot of people, it's no, not because they don't care, but because actually that worker is a subcontractor to someone else. It's like, then it's like, why? Let's dig into why. Is it because of their role? Is it because you actually don't know their name? Is it because it's a different person every week? Because they're a subcontractor who's like not even securely employed? And like, so it's a good way. It's not a way to make everybody feel bad. It's a way to start digging. Why don't we see everybody as our coworker? Why don't we see, if you work at a company that hires gig workers, do you see the gig workers as your coworkers? No, you probably, maybe you do. I hope you do. But, or do you see them as one user base? Because what we talk about then is like, oh, it's a two-sided model. We have our riders and our drivers, or we have our pickers and our, it's like, you see them as one of the user bases, but you do see them as your coworkers. Do you see them as people you have a responsibility to as a worker, not just as someone for whom you're designing an experience?
So back to the always ask why.
Yeah, I think it's like, there's like, the whole like 5 whys, but I actually think now oh gosh, now I have to remember what they are. Tony Benn, he's a sadly deceased. Well, he would have been like 120, I think. He's a UK Labour politician who was really radical. And he had these 5 little questions he thought you should ask everybody. And it was like, what power do you have? Where did you get it from? How do I take it away from you? Like, it's like, I can't remember all 5. It's like, it's like, but it's just like, what power do you have? In whose interest do you exercise it? Where do you get it from? And then there's number 4, and then there's how do we get rid of you?
Oh,
and that is really important. How do we get rid of you? Because like we have to acknowledge that like if we're workers, we can be got rid of. And the people who own the, it's like, but CEOs can also be got rid of. The board can fire a CEO.
Yeah.
But who's making the decision? So it's like, it's not about trying to get fired people. It's like remembering that even though we right now, and I think a lot of people who haven't been in, or maybe it's like, I can only speak for like Europe and the US. The people who haven't been in working life for longer than say like 15 years have not weathered a recession and haven't, maybe people who are in their 30s like graduated into a recession. But watching like everybody, when I was living in Ireland in the 2000s, like watching everybody lose their job, watching people go like, I think I'm going to end up homeless, watching people go from a solid salary to unemployment and not, it's like, we have to remember that we are disposable and that shouldn't make us feel bad. It should make us feel like, okay, now what? Because that's the important thing is like, now what? I was listening to a podcast yesterday and it was just like, what, so what, and now what? This is a civil rights activist. And he was talking about these 3 questions that could be applied to any problem. What is the problem? So what? And now what? And we can't leave out any part of that. And I think that's a really, so it's like, it always comes down to like, don't be afraid to, there's this concept of like the pick me person, there's always somebody who's like, it's kind of like the teacher's pet, like, and you're like, yeah, you might get picked, but then what happens? What happens when they tire of you? And I think it's happened to a lot of these like women in tech movements where it's like, oh, we're going to get women into leadership positions. And it's like, sure, but are they getting into leadership positions because they want to enact feminist principles, or are they getting into leadership positions because they promised never to do it?
Right.
And there's a difference. And then they get picked, and then they get fired, and then they're like, now they're like, I'm going to speak out now. And it's like, yeah, you actually stepped on a lot of people to get, like, good, speak out, but like, you should take a big seat for a little while. I'm very sorry that happened to you, but you got where you wanted to be because you decided that feminism wasn't useful to you. And now you come back to us and you haven't apologized. Like, and you haven't figured out like that was kind of the point, is getting power by promising never to upset the power structure is not progress.
Right. Yeah. And not cleaning up your, sexist culture when you hire women in tech companies, and you still have,
Yeah.
I mean,
like,
yeah.
And there's a lot of like, people who will go, I've heard this referred to as soul laundering. So they'll work at like a big tech company and then they'll decide that they feel really guilty, and they'll go and take a job in like a nonprofit or in government services. And then they start to resent that the salary is like not what they hoped, and they won't get these big fancy, but it's just not as fancy. And there's so much they want. They're like resentful, and it's not actually that fun to work with them because they're resentful and they're here to cleanse their soul. And it's like, listen, go in over, you have money. Like, but it's also like, but it comes down to, how do we make sure our industry is not reliant on these companies only for job creation? How do we make sure that there is fruitful, fair, equitable employment, including, Helle, you and I have talked about this, including part-time work? We're not talking about part-time work. Like not being open to, number one, permanently remote people and part-timers. That is ableism and ageism. And it's so many isms. And it's like,
is that, I have this conference and it takes up maybe, 4 or 5 months of my year. And then the rest is I'm open for jobs. And I would love to have a part-time job. But people are like, well, no, you're not available. I mean, I'm available, 60 hours the rest of the year, and how much, new knowledge and new network. I'm expanding my network with at least 200 people every year. How valuable is that for a company, but this is a discussion I'm gonna.
Yeah. And I think like, now I don't blame people for like, get the money. Like you're not required to take a vow of poverty in life. It doesn't help anybody. But how do we make sure that that's not the only path? And I think in content design and UX writing right now, we do have this this very, very strong period of growth. But a lot of that growth is, it's a both and problem, because it's good that a lot of companies are like scaling up their content design teams and UX writing teams, whatever you want to call it. There's a big title war. I'm sitting it out. So I use both. And, but it also means that the success of our discipline is dependent on the increased and continually increasing size and scale of these companies. It also means that we have to show our worth through metrics that maybe aren't appropriate to design. I do not believe that quantitative metrics should be the most important marker of good design. They have a place, obviously, but it's like, it means that we have to show return on investment in ways that like maybe aren't appropriate, in addition to being demoralizing. Maybe we don't have access to creating that impact because we don't have the power inside the company. And it's just like, there's so many, it's a very, very brittle sort of growth right now. And my argument is always like, we need to make sure that there are other places that are hiring content people, freelance, part-time, preferably not freelance. I mean, some freelance, but it's like people, whatever they want, whatever works for them. Like people need stable, well-paid work that isn't only tied to one type of the industry that we work in. And, it
isn't tied to 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Because
and like
people have reasons, they have small kids, or they have a dog, or they have other interests or other jobs or whatever.
And it's a really, so like we have this and I just think like we're not really talking about the problems of design if we're not talking about power. We're just creating more, we're just like putting more forms in front of people that they don't want to fill out, or that they're like, why do I have to do this? Or like, and like the experience of now that like all of our lives are so, 10 years ago, you had a banking app and you probably didn't use it, but if you did, you could always call the bank or go into a branch, and like the human backups are being removed.
Yeah.
And like now digital is essential. So you need content people, you need people to own processes, you need people to own the experience that can see this in a really holistic way. But also like everything is becoming siloed so much. I mean, my in-laws drove across, they like swapped cars with my mother-in-law's husband's son. They swapped cars because he has an electric car. So they borrowed his electric car and they're like, we're gonna drive electric. We're gonna drive from Stockholm to Gothenburg in this electric car. And they were very proud of themselves. And it's only like a 5-hour drive. It took them 12 hours. And the reason it took them 12 hours was because there were not enough fast charging stations. And at every fast charging station, they had to download a different app and create an account.
Stop.
Right? There were plenty of fast charging stations, but they belong to Tesla, and Tesla is not required to share. So imagine if gas stations, like you could only fill up your Toyota at a Toyota gas station.
No.
You could only fill up. So it's like, these are not digital experience. We have to stop thinking about digital experiences. We have to stop it because it's not digital. It's like your app is the 5th app that these two 71-year-olds just had to download on their trip across the country to visit their grandkids. Like
crazy.
and create another account.
Yeah.
So like, is your form, like I'm bringing it back to forms. It's like, is your form the 5th thing that this person has had to fill out today? And like, I do a lot of things with a screaming, whining toddler hanging off me. Like everyone should have, in high school, in American high schools, we didn't have one, but like they started doing this thing in some schools called the Baby Think It Over. And it's like a baby doll that like behaves like a real baby. So it like screams and like poops and you have to like take care. It's like a Tamagotchi. Whoa. Everyone should have to have, maybe we should have a little Tamagotchi that would be like the Baby Think It Over. But when you're designing something, you also need to have this Tamagotchi next to you. Be like, you cannot like, oh no, it pooped. Oh no, it pooped on my computer. Like,
that's funny. Oh no, the user left. The user refused to download the app.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's just, we don't think enough about, it's not saying we don't think about people. Of course we think about real world experiences, but we're like, are we thinking about all the other apps that they're using? Are we thinking about like how many apps they downloaded today because they had to? Like no one, it's like forms and apps. I always say the same thing, like no one wants an app. No one is looking at their phone going, you know what I could really use? The more apps. No, the only time that ever happened was when the iPhone was first launched and people paid 99 cents for the fart app because there was like nothing else to download.
Or the voice.
But like no one wants an app. No one wants a form. No one wants to do things on the internet. They might, like, they're there to look at dog pictures. They're there to do the thing they need to do. They're there to have a conversation with their friend. Like, they're not there to, they don't care about your product, and that's good. You should, and people, I think sometimes, especially like at the senior, like with people who are super invested in the company, when you say like, no one wants your product, like, oh, but everyone, it's like, no, it's a healthy attitude to start from the position of no one wants your product. Start from zero. Do not assume, and don't assume that if I use your product once, that I want you to email me every day to remind me that I should open the thing and do the thing.
And don't assume that if I visit your website that I want to sign up to your newsletter, or I want this notification or that modal, leave me alone.
Or if I sign up for your rewards point program because I want to collect points and get discounts, that I want 5 newsletters a day. Right. I actually don't. Even if I want your newsletter, do I want 5? Looking at you, gap.com.
Anyway, I was wondering if anybody in the audience had any questions for Jane. Somebody wrote in the chat.
Oh yeah, Eventbrite refused to let me attend this event with you. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing. Like, where do we force the account? Where do we force account creation, and where can we get around it? Like sometimes there's no safe way to do things without some kind of friction. So for example, like signing up to something and like, in the beginning of COVID, there was a lot of Zoom bombing because people weren't,
Yes.
it's like, and there was bad Zoom bombing, and then there was like funny Zoom bombing, and but like, so yeah, and it's like, where are we actually, where are we harming the user for the sake of getting more customers, getting more information, getting more people that we can send emails to that they don't
So,
want?
I have a question. Rachel, you managed to get a login link.
Yeah.
How did you get that? That's kind of strange. Because that,
Oh, like a magic link. Okay. That is very cool.
is it cool? Because isn't that exactly what the Zoom bombers did or do?
I don't know. Maybe if they could,
Oh,
yeah, I don't know. I clicked a join link and now I can't recall. Oh, so it's like third party login. See, this is the problem with like frictionless. People don't know if they have an account. I
right.
don't know if I have an account.
It was
Like,
underneath the register. Yikes, that's
yeah,
bad.
yikes. Like, and if people are saying yikes to your design,
Yeah.
like,
Oh, that's bad. But that's bad for me also. I mean, then Rachel, you might not get my email with all the links in it, but I mean, I guess you don't care. You know what else is I don't know. I don't want people to have to create an Eventbrite account for joining these conversations. Of course, I would want I don't want the link for the conference to get out because that's
yeah,
obviously
that's the thing. Oh, you still had to enter the email. Okay, so they probably did.
okay. So I
And that's
probably
the
do.
thing. It's not clear now if you have an account.
Now that is weird. No
But that's
password.
the thing, like, I think that comes back to like, number one, content design, making it clear you have created an account, or you haven't created an account, you will only get information about this event. But also, if they have a content designer, is that person allowed to contribute to this process?
Yeah. We should write to Eventbrite and invite them to your workshop.
Someone put that on LinkedIn because he said something about the form to sign up. So yeah, I mean, I use Meetup to run my UX writing meetup. I run the UX writing and content design Stockholm meetup. And it's like, I don't want to use Meetup, but everyone's on Meetup, and Meetup is owned by WeWork, and WeWork is sketchy as hell, but Meetup
Yes.
is how you get found. And it's like, I don't want WeWork to like, and I have to pay all this money to them, and they don't have, it's like, I don't
Yeah.
want to do all the things it tells me, like, and I have my own personal, like, nobody's allowed to use my Meetup list for marketing. Nobody's like, no, this is for information about my events, and it is for people, is for the community.
Yeah, I should also mention that, I do take the emails from the Eventbrite's event. So tonight's event, I'm going to send out to all 113 people who signed up who might not even be here. I'll send the link to our conversation, which will be online, and I'll send all the links to the stuff we talked about. But I'm not adding you to the UX Copenhagen newsletter, and I'm not forcing you to sign up to any, of
Yeah. It's like, but
anything.
this is the thing. It's like, it's so easy to do the wrong thing. They make it so easy to do the wrong thing. Like, did they sell Meetup? Oh, that would make me feel so much better. I mean, like, marginally better. But like, WeWork is so sketchy. I read both WeWork books when they came out and watched I'm obsessed with grifters. Like, really, that could be like we could be here all day because I am obsessed with grifters. But I'm kind of obsessed with, con artists. Because I'm really fascinated by people who like never think they're wrong. Yeah. Like, because I think I'm wrong about everything I have said for the last 54 minutes. And I worry that I'm wrong about everything. And I think and I just wonder, like, what would it be like to just march in and spout like unfounded bullshit that you cannot back up in any way and just keep repeating it? Like, what would it be like to have like 10% of that confidence? Like, I would not need any Xanax. I would probably not need therapy. Like, I would save so much therapy money if I just had like 10% of the confidence of these grifters.
I wish I could, I wish you could see yourself the way that we see you, because
but I mean, that's not, but it's more just like, I'm really fascinated by people who do not operate by the same value system that the rest of us operate.
Yeah. Oh yeah, me too.
And I also understand how people fall for it, because I don't think it's fair to be like, only losers fall for that, because that's not fair. I mean,
No.
we're all like, we're all falling for stuff.
Yes.
So.
And I'm reading a book right now, the what's it called? Sapiens.
Okay.
I can't remember his name. Anyway, it's super interesting. It's all about how, how we became what we are today. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah, he says that, well, everything is fiction, which is true. I mean, it's all, money is fiction, UX Copenhagen is fiction. Everything's fiction.
Everything is a story that we have told ourselves enough times. I've read the antidote to the Yuval Harari book, which is called The Dawn of Everything by David Wengrove and David Graeber.
The what?
The Dawn of Everything. It's so good. I'm telling everyone to read it. And then the other book I'm telling everyone to read is Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, which is just like life-changing for someone like me who doesn't know very much about, they're both very much about Indigenous knowledge.
Right.
Really hopeful books. They're both really like, wow, capitalism is an outlier. Like that's the big thing I took away is like capitalism isn't, not only is the thing where it's like the only way a lie, it's actually an outlier in human history. Like cultures of dominance and subjugation are not required for large groups. And like, so like Braiding Sweetgrass, it's so good. And she's such an amazing storyteller and it's just such an incredible book. I just finished it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so good. I think it's like, because she talks about, this gift culture and how in a gift culture, like everyone has a responsibility and you have to like pay, you don't keep gifts. But she has this really great part and it's like right in the beginning. So if you just start it and you like don't finish it because there's so many other good books out there, you'll still get to the part about like how like wild strawberries they belong to wild strawberries. And it's just this like incredible thing about like what can be commoditized and what can be bought and sold and how like utterly offensive to humanity and to nature and to the world it is that we collect wild things and sell them. And like, it's just a really, but she's also very, the books are also very realistic about like, this is what we live in. This is how, And The Dawn of Everything is great too, because it's very, it's based on a lot of archaeological research as well, archaeological and archival research. And there's like so much more documented Indigenous reaction to colonialism in the Americas. Like there's all this stuff about like, why are Europeans so mean to each other? Like, and it's just like, why are French people so angry all the time? Like, why aren't they nice to each other? Why don't they seem to care? Like, and
it's so fun. I just read a book called Humankind by Rutger Bregman. And he says that people are kind, if you ask everybody thinks that we live on this planet where people are hateful or they're mean to each other. And actually we're pretty nice and decent to each other all the time.
But this is more like, what I like about this book is like they gathered up 30 years of archaeological and archival and historical research. And they talk about like these Indigenous cultures that have been treated as if they're like lost in some way, and they're absolutely not. And then Braiding Sweetgrass talks a lot about how she was trying to reconnect with her grandfather and her and like just in his history, and how like his family was removed from their land, and he was sent to one of these schools where if you spoke your language, your mouth was washed out, or worse, like that they were not erased, they were taken. And how do we help? It's a really, really good book. And I think it's really valuable for designers to know about human history and to not read it distilled through like some journalists from Wired. It's actually like people who are really, know this stuff deeply. Yeah, The Dawn of Everything.
The Dawn of Everything in Sapiens.
David Graeber and David Wengrove. And sadly, David Graeber, was the last thing he wrote before he died. And he's such a loss to humanity. He also wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs. And he also wrote one called The Utopia of Rules. He wrote another one called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. He is an absolutely fascinating writer. He's like an anarchist anthropologist, and he died really young, so it's super tragic.
Oh. Well, that was kind of a sad note to end this
conversation. But the book is really hopeful. That's the thing. Like the book is super hopeful, and so is Braiding Sweetgrass. And I think that is actually such an important thing for designers to put down the design books and read other things. Read like, I don't read, like, listen, I mean, I read the content design books because they're good and they're useful and I want to know what's being said. But like, all business books are the same. They all say the same 5 things. And like, read them if you need to, but read the review of them, you'll get the same. But like, reading other things, watching and listening to other things, like like, if you're interested in people, like, learn about people and go as close to the source as you can. I think that's the same with like any like user research. You wouldn't just read about people from a third or fourth party, like go close to the source.
That's great. Well, thank you for that. And
Thank
thanks
you so much.
everybody. Jane, thank you for your time. And we can't wait to see you at the conference.
I'm so excited. Thank you.
I hope you can make it here to Copenhagen. That would be really nice.
Oh my God, let's hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. And some of you, I see at least one person in my Rosenfeld workshop next week. And yeah, and I'll send you the link for my Berg's course.
Right. Lovely. Thank you. And hope to see lots of you at the conference.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.